Isekai Shokudou, or Restaurant to Another World, is this summer's 2017 anime adaptation of a light novel by the same name, and is, to be honest, a really surprising show. And it's by no means a show that blows me away with amazing plot. No, that department can be summed up instead by the genre known as slice of life. It's a slice of life show that features a spin on the Monster of the Week formula and instead has what seems to be a dish of the week. Each episode revolves around humans or creatures finding this magical door leading to Nekoya, a restaurant that serves beings from other worlds. Those who find this restaurant usually only order one thing, and that is the reason for dish of the week. But what makes this show compelling to watch are these separate stories and how they interlace with the actual food aspect of this show. The food here is done in a way that's not intrusive and yet still holds meaning for the show as a whole, in a way that's not usually done in food-centered animes from my experiences. And from its first 5 episodes of airing, let's see what I think of Isekai Shokudou.
魔族はなかなか雇ってもらえません。持っていたお金はあっという間に底をつき、私は貧しい民ですら住んでいないような
Usually when I think of food anime, I think of the more crazier and exaggerated food animes like Shokugeki or Kofuku Graffiti, and even to an extent Sweetness and Lightning. If I had to say, this show is more similar to Sweetness and Lightning, but that show still has its problems and still expends most of its airing time preparing the food and going through this process of a cooking tutorial. But what I like about Isekai is that it barely shows the process of how the food is made. It instead focuses on what the food means and the different people that so happen to visit Nekoya. It has a calming cadence towards each episode and opens and ends each story arc in particularly the same manner, with the same atmosphere that allows itself to be consistent but not far-reaching. I almost want to say it's formulaic to a fault, and although the formula is there and tried and true, falls short on itself by not allowing for deviations, at least so far. Going into it, that's definitely something to keep in mind. It's a show that stays true to itself and has a predictable format, but every individual piece of that format is something different and presents itself a new idea, which is what I like. It's almost like Death Parade in that regards, at least for me. But let's get back to the food.
この果物の甘酸っぱさもすごくいい。この焼き菓子と果物も
Each episode's mantra revolves around the different people that visit Nekoya and the food they order, which isn't arbitrary at all, but instead holds different values to the customers. These values can range from anything small like holding a contract of loyalty and of the idea of possession to family heirlooms, and even of racial tradition and honor, and on a more personal note of self-discovery and enlightenment. Somehow, Isekai manages to fit in a whole backstory behind each dish served and manages to build a fantasy world one step at a time through the simple action of eating. They don't glorify the act of eating or cooking, and even when the characters describe the food, it's done in a way that allows me to get a good grasp of what they're eating, and I rather like that in a slice of life show of this manner. The trope or niche that Isekai is trying to sell is that this is a food-oriented anime, you know? We have this cool restaurant that attaches to the other world, and the cook is just some old bloke who apparently has the hands of God, but it's not so overbearing to throw it in our face, and really wants us to get into the backstory of the people with the food there only to facilitate a formula for the show. It reminds me of things like Flying Witch, where the magic in the show is a subtle after effect of the world building, but they never over-glorify the magic done, and it very much keeps the atmosphere of the show despite magic being usually something fantastical. It remains consistent in the world without breaking me out by wowing me in spectacle. The magic felt a part of the world rather than an outside factor. Likewise, the food is a mainstay of the show and yet just feels there and a part of the weird fantasy world mix. It doesn't feel forced or brings me out, but appropriate for what the show is, which is still mainly about a restaurant and not really about the world building per se. For that, of course, the show really does lack in any actual plot so far, and there's still lots of problems and things I'd like to see the show do, like actually show an episode where we interact with Earth humans, since all we've been getting is this otherworld creatures mix, but that's just a small gripe with me. But altogether, even if it does keep consistent with what it's trying to do with the way it presents itself, which is amazing, it still is a show that heavily relies on this factor of episodic curiosity. The more I'm introduced to the characters, the more we also get to see them reappear and become a part of the restaurant. We learn why these people are here, the connection to their dish, and as we get to broadening the cast, those that we've seen start appearing more and more. It's a slice of life staple to have these recurring side characters populate the world that's being built, and in a very clever way they allow these characters to be there and not to be intrusive but still feel organic. It's a restaurant that appears every 7 days after all, and if they're there to eat, then it makes sense. They're not trying to shoehorn characters into episodes, but rather it makes sense that we start seeing these characters more and more. But again, this only only ever becomes rich in characterization if we start seeing these characters interact and become vital to the plot again, rather than just being side characters. Hopefully from the episode preview that I've seen in episode 6, we might be seeing a little more of that, but there's still the issue of the true actual main cast we currently have and the lack of characterization for them. That's the kind of thing that wraps Isekai up for me, the lack of characterization for really anyone. We have these true main casts that are just there, and we have a rotating cast of newcomers that, although get the limelight, only gets the limelight for half an episode. This sudden introduction and characterization to try and make compelling characters each week is a tough job, and so far I still don't really have that kind of strong connection with the characters of the show. And that's mainly due to the focus of the show, which isn't really about the world building, but again, about the restaurant. I like to at least know a little bit more about the owner or even the new hire he got, but we don't see too many scenes, and if we do, it's very brief and tacked on at the end of arcs. That's why I think one of the main pushing points for Isekai is the whole food-centric female plots that they have. I can't stress this enough that I think Isekai does a wonderful job in masking together this simple concept of food. Food is a basic necessity and hunger is a basic need. It's instinct, it's primordial, and yet food itself can be complicated. Food can be filled with so much life and nuance that makes it worth animating and makes it worth talking about. It's within these shows that make food to be like an art form in of itself, and wrapping each dish towards a greater sub-story behind each character is also great. Putting that in a restaurant where their patrons and the chef all stand and sit under the same roof, where food is a connecting feature that allows everyone's problems to melt away in a single area, is also great. For me, again, it makes itself out to be a distinctive feature of Isekai compared to other slice of life, and it really does wear that on its shoulder. Isekai is lacking something that I hope it picks up for later episodes, that of which is the characters and the longevity of these characters. It is also a show that can be extremely hit or miss for many, as each episode and each story is so individualistic to new characters and new ideas that it can either come off as a mess or truly episodic. It's not a show that sustains itself to a greater plot found underneath, but still brings about interesting ideas and problems within this fantasy world that we still don't know about. I'd recommend this show to slice of life fans that want a different spin on the genre, but to keep in mind the formulaic nature and the lack of characterization to keep a coherent plot thread. But who knows, the show still has a bunch of room, as is with the slice of life genre, so only time can tell. It's still quite an enjoyable watch for all of its worth, and I look forward to sitting down every week in the restaurant to another world.